Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, and I'm inviting you to join us in looking behind the headlines that make our city and our state tick. State Senator Martin Looney, President Pro Tem of Connecticut State Senate, is here with us the way he was the very first show we did in 2015 and at the beginning and end of every session. Senator Looney, thank you so much for making time to come on Dateline New Haven today. Okay, I'm not hearing you. Harry Droz, our station manager. Is there a reason that we're not hearing Martin Looney? And what we do is at the beginning of every session, we ask Martin Looney what he's hoping to accomplish, and he always comes back and lets us know. But he's on Zoom today because of Omicron. We're not going in person. I'm waiting to hear from our station manager, Harry Droz, about the technical glitch that I'm not hearing. The state senator I have is lower 6. So I apologize for trying to figure out how to make Zoom and our board work. I don't know what, lower auxiliary. Okay. How about now? Senator Looney, are you there? Still? I apologize for that, Marty. We're just going to, higher. How about now? Nope. Harry, that's not working, and I do appreciate, Senator, we're going to get this technical issue fixed. That's the era of COVID-19, and we're going to talk about that on the show. We're all trying to figure out, we thought we had it down with Zoom and getting all machines, and now we're partly, I have to do something with the board here. Harry Droz is not here. Aux go. I don't know what, there's the AUX.
Well, you should be able to hear him now. Do you hear me?
I hear you. I do not hear Martin Looney.
Can you hear me?
I can now. Okay, Marty, sorry about that glitch. Well, Marty, welcome back to Dateline New Haven. How you doing?
Oh, great, Paul. Great to be with you today. I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, before we start, I want to help me name this episode. I thought we should either do what are you going to do for an encore or okay, but what have you done for me lately? You like either of those? I'll tell you why I came up with those names, Marty, because every year you come on, you say, here's what we hope to accomplish in the state legislature this year. We send you up to Hartford every term. Now you're in charge of the Senate. You got a Democratic majority, and you really hit the ball out of the park last year. I mean, as you know, we wrote about this, we talked about this. You got some stuff passed that we were waiting many years for that have changed life in the state. The biggest one being the payments in lieu of taxes formula for the state. New Haven is getting $49 million more than we used to get a year for a property that's off the tax rolls. The state says you can't tax it, but they weren't giving us the money because of you organizing smaller towns to join bigger cities and pushing for that change. You passed paid family and medical leave, which is now taking effect. Sports betting, you made marijuana recreational use legal. What are you going to do for an encore this year, Marty?
Well, I think we can try to build on some of our successes. One of the major themes, I think, this year will be mental health. We know that there have been many instances of people who are acutely suffering with emotional and psychological problems related to stress due to the pandemic. I think we need to look at that in terms of providing access to quality care and insurance coverage. We know there are too many cases where people don't have insurance that covers mental health or don't have access to coverage, especially in terms of children. And we know that they've suffered acutely because of this crisis. And finding child psychiatrists who are willing to take insurance is a very difficult one. So we have a number of task forces that we appointed pursuant to Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2 of the last session that are supposed to report back to us at the beginning of this session. But I think addressing mental health and gaps in mental health coverage and treatment will be front and center as a major issue this time.
So I know one issue now, I'm trying to figure out if what you're talking about is ongoing problems that are not specific to COVID that just came into higher relief because during the pandemic with people locked up inside and worry about if they're going to die or having people they know die or very sick in the hospital, well, that just made everyone a little crazy. And by that, I mean in general terms, and even people who aren't having mental health problems were all freaking out a little bit during this pandemic. So are you saying that there were underlying problems in the mental health system that you want to address that are not specific to COVID, but perhaps there's more attention to now because of people not being able to get help during COVID?
Exactly. And we're not saying that these problems suddenly suddenly appeared in 2020, but they became more acute, and I think have now drawn more general attention than they had before.
So now these problems, you mentioned one thing, that psychiatrists and psychologists, because don't most people go to social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists for the most part if they're having trouble? And I know a lot of them don't like to take insurance because of all the...
Right.
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Marty?
I said psychiatrists are the MDs who generally prescribe the
medication. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that including psychologists, I have someone I know close to who they go to people, they don't take insurance because it's such a hassle. So we're creating an unequal society that way, that if you can afford to pay over $100 an hour, you're going to go. Most people can't, right? How does a legislature deal with that? If a therapist has a right to say, I'm just going to have people have money come to me because I just can't deal with all the paperwork with insurance companies and how they don't reimburse us at a high rate, what can you guys do about that, Marty?
Well, I think we can try to look at ways that would make it less onerous for private providers, psychiatrists, psychologists, or psychiatric social workers, or whatever their professional credential might be, to not be so averse to dealing with insurance. We've got to try to find some ways to streamline that process so that they don't automatically reject people who don't have ready cash.
And am I right that is one of the big obstacles here?
It is. At least that's what they report as being the major disincentive for them not to engage with insurance.
Now, this is dramatic. So the insurance companies basically don't want to pay what therapists want to charge. How do you do that? How do you? I guess that's what your task force is looking into. Do you have any initial ideas about what might show up in a bill this year about that?
Well, I don't want to jump ahead. I want to wait to see what the task force recommends. One of the things might be to try to find a way to at least make insurers participate up to a point where the copays are manageable. So maybe the insurance will cover $70 of a $100 payment, and the person might have to pay the difference. But anything along those lines would be better than the situation now.
Meaning that, so if insurers have to cover more of the copay, so say you tell them you don't have to tell the therapist you can't charge your $100 an hour, but we will cover copays. Now, what insurance companies tell you? They're obviously saying we can't make money on this, right?
Well, that's been part of it up to now. They're saying that their overhead and their costs mean the premiums they would have to charge would increase. But that's part of what we're looking at. It's a complex issue, but clearly there's a treatment gap that's based upon wealth, and so greater wealth equals greater access, and that's really not just.
And then one thing that this always comes down to is whether private insurance is a viable way to deal with healthcare in our society. And you know where I'm going with this, Marty. If the business model of insurance companies is we try to pay you as little money as possible, get as much money as we can from you, and then pay out as little money as possible for healthcare that people need, find reasons to reject you, to not cover what it really costs because they have a profit motive. And we know that the incentives within HMOs and other health insurance outfits is to reward people who work for their staffs who find ways to say no to people. Is there a chance that a public option can come on the horizon, or other ways of dealing with the mental health challenges through government?
Well, I would certainly hope so. I think the opportunity for doing it this particular session is probably not realistic, and this is going to be our shortest of short sessions because we start later than usual because of the configuration of this being February 9th, the latest possible starting date, and May 4th, the end date, which is one of the earliest. So we have exactly 12 weeks. But the issue has been on the table, will continue to be. I know the governor has had problems with the issue, but there'll be ongoing discussion on it because I think the only way to expand coverage and to reduce cost overall would be to have some form of public option out there as an alternative way to get insurance.
So again, we've talked about this other years, Marty. When you decide to do something big, you can't just say we're going to do it this year. It doesn't matter how much kind of supermajority you have. You often have to bring up an idea like getting rid of the death penalty or police accountability. Year after year, you propose it, you study it, you have hearings, you vote maybe, gets out of committee, and you build support over time. Would it be fair to say, listening to you, talk about the mental health issue is that you want to get started this year on addressing long-term challenges with mental health. There's a good guess, without getting in front of what your task force says, is that you might be able to deal this year with some kind of proposal dealing with co-pays to help more people afford private insurance for mental health coverage. But that long-term, it might involve some kind of government help that might not be realistic, not just because it's a short session, but because it's an election year. Is that a fair way to put it, Marty?
I'd say that's fair, Paul. And I do hope we can make some progress on it this year, because the goal is to have more people have access to coverage that they can afford, and to have more providers participate in the insurance system, so they'll see more patients who aren't wealthy.
All right. Martin Looney, State Senate President and the New Haven State Senator here on Dateline New Haven. Before we go on with your other top priorities, Marty, I wonder if we could briefly go back to the stuff that got passed in the last session and how it's working out. So your big one, as I said, was pilot, payments in lieu of taxes. You came up with a novel organizing strategy that shifted the reality of voting at the Capitol, where it used to be bigger cities against everybody else when it came to reimbursing for tax-exempt property. You got the middle-level towns, smaller towns that have some tax-exempt property to participate in a 3-tier system for reimbursement so that they would vote in favor of it. How permanent is this? Is this like the child tax credit in Congress, where something gets passed after a long time, but it can sunset or get defunded if, let's say, Republicans take over? Or is there a permanent mechanism in place so that we won't see our new level of reimbursement drop?
I don't think we'll see our level of reimbursement drop, because, as you pointed out, we built a significant coalition of interest on this, of communities, large, small, wealthy, and poor. Because, as you said, it used to be under pilot that whatever pilot eligible property a town had was all reimbursed at the same level, whether it was Greenwich or Hartford or New Haven. But now with the 3-tiered structure based upon net grand list per capita, and the way we set it, that the tier of towns under $100,000 in net grand list per capita get a 50% reimbursement of pilot. The next tier between 100 and 200,000 net grand list get 40, and for those over 200,000 get 30. And the key is that those getting 30 are still getting more than what the old formula was, that pay them about 25. So all of a sudden you had towns of all kinds participating in this program. And we see a tremendous range, as we've talked about before, between Greenwich on the one hand, that has a net grand list per capita of over $700,000,
Wow.
and New Britain, which is about $69,000.
Wow.
There's the disparity in Connecticut in property-based wealth.
Upstairs,
And-
downstairs.
Yep, upstairs, downstairs, right. So the configuration we were able to adopt last year built a bigger constituency for pilot, because previously, as you said, it was only the relatively small number of towns that either had colleges, private colleges and hospitals, or had a lot of state property that had a particular interest in pilot. So obviously Hartford and New Haven and Mansfield and New London and Middletown and a few places like that had a very significant interest in pilot, others significantly less. So now we've built a much broader based coalition, which is why we had some Republican first selectmen endorsing the plan, because they knew it was going to mean more for their towns.
I don't want to drag this out a lot, and I'm glad to hear that. Does that mean that theoretically it's not set in stone, that if there's a tough budget year, we got a lot of money flowing in for a few years now, and I had a sense that some of the Republican first selectmen from wealthier towns were okay with this because it meant they weren't going to have their money cut because enough money's flowing into the state. If we hit harder times in 5 years, I still think your answer seems to be that there are enough people, enough municipalities benefiting from this that the coalition will always be there to protect it. Will they need to protect it? Will it always be possible for a more conservative legislature, more suburban legislature, wealthier town down legislature to come in and undo it?
Well, one of the most difficult things, I think, for legislators to defend, and one of the things they're most sensitive to, is grants to their town. So since this is a grant to municipalities, legislators who wanted to cut it would have to go back to their mayors and first selectmen and try to say, we didn't protect you on this and we're cutting you. So I think this is such a popular program that it's likely to withstand that pressure.
And Marty Looney, also marijuana legalization, recreational use is now legal in Connecticut. I guess each town gets to set up where you can smoke it and how you can sell it, correct?
That's right. There are local options allowed. Some towns may decide through their zoning power not to allow it. Others will be in the process of adopting rules. And we probably won't see it operational until somewhat later this year, until the rulemaking process and the zoning process is complete. But after years and years of battling on this, we did get that across the finish line this year. And the key piece, I think, was that looking at the experience of other states that saw that local entrepreneurs and people in low-income communities were largely frozen out of the business because out-of-state companies came in and bought up all the franchises and licenses. We believe we have enough protections in the law to prevent that from happening. Because the problem, of course, that while marijuana continues to be illegal at the federal level, which means that the conventional banking system is not available to give loans for businesses looking to start up in this area, alternative kinds of financing have to be found, and that always creates a challenge for new businesses that are not heavily capitalized when they start.
How about a community bank like New Haven Bank? I guess they're federally chartered, but they
every bank is covered in some way, I think, by even if they're state chartered, they'd still be under FDIC regulation.
Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Does that mean it's illegal for them because they're federally regulated to give loans to a marijuana dispensary?
I believe it is currently. I think that's been one of the problems.
Oh, that's messed up. So, Marty, my favorite way marijuana. Now, so you no longer get one immediate change already this year, Marty. So if you're smoking a joint on the green, you don't get arrested. Or if you're in a car and you're smoking a joint, you don't get arrested, right?
Right, because it is legal now. Yes.
So my favorite part is what they do in Hamden. All these cannabis. You know about this? They have a market on the weekends, and on Treadwell Street, and they you go there and you can buy a gift. You can buy like a bracelet or buy a booklet, and then as a present gift, quote unquote, the purveyor then gives you a bag of marijuana edibles. I love the creativity of the entrepreneurial mind.
Yeah.
How about sports betting? How's that working out?
That's I think for the first month or so, the projected revenue that we thought we would get, I think we were right on target. I think they were talking about 4.2 million for the first month of operation. We were right in that area. Of course, it finally got started during football season, which is the highest betting time of the year, probably apart from the betting around the NCAA basketball tournament.
Martin Looney, what are some of the other priorities you have for 2022? We talked about getting a start on mental health disparities revealed in greater relief by the pandemic. What are some of the immediate topics on your to-do list for this short session? As you mentioned, on even number years and people running for re-election, the legislature is in for only a couple months.
Well, one of the things that I'd like to address this year is something that's also been a perennial problem for municipalities, and that is the cost of special education. Right now, the way it works is that a town has to spend 4.5 times its state per pupil grant before it's eligible for state reimbursement for special ed costs. And of course, a family moves into a community with a child with special ed needs. There's no way for a town to plan for that, especially if it's an expensive placement requiring a great deal of care. And the problem is, of course, that can be really expensive for a community, both large and small, both wealthy and poor. So I would like to see us have a system somewhat based upon the pilot tiering, is to look at town wealth and have a sliding scale that the state would reimburse for special ed costs for towns whose net grand list per capita is under $100,000, and have the state start kicking in with money significantly sooner than they do under current law. So right now it's like 4.5 times. So perhaps for communities, the poorer communities, they would only have to spend twice their per pupil grant before the state aid kicks in. And then the second tier, maybe 2.75, and then the third tier, maybe 3.5. The other thing that we could build into that is an incentive for and a reward for being part of a regional school district, so that whatever your tier is in terms of grand list, that you could get a bonus, an extra special ed reimbursement by being part of a regional school district. Well,
that's okay. We got two things to unpack there, Marty. So regionalism is something a lot of people, as a matter of fact, I remember interviewing about this in the 90s. You've been pushing regionalism, consolidation of services among towns to try to develop more efficiently, less overhead, more money going to the actual service. A lot of resistance to that. How realistic is it that would make the difference for, let's say, Derby and Sonia to degree to merge their school system, or Hamden and North Haven?
Well, I think it would be a help. Certainly that because every town complains about special ed costs playing havoc with their budget. And I keep hoping on this because we have one highly successful example of a regional change that we made against significant odds, and that was the regionalization of the probate court system that took 2010. We consolidated 117 probate districts down to 54 because it used to be every little town was its own separate probate district.
Right.
And the odds that consolidation were significant because you were actually doing away with elected positions. Talk about stepping on a vested interest.
Yeah, how did you do that? I mean, you're in practice with one of those former judges. How did you do that? You must have gotten some good advice on that, right?
Luckily, he wasn't affected by it because larger cities were able to maintain their status as single-town districts. But the operating principle that we used was that any town with a population under 40,000 should assume that it would become part of a regional district, and only those over 40,000 would continue as single-town districts. But that has really worked very well. The system has been more professionalized, greater efficiencies, better staffing, more access. Many of the small-town probate courts were only open a few hours per week, and the whole system has improved and also become more financially sound because of that. So that's why I keep pursuing the holy grail of regionalism, because we've seen it work once.
And you're not getting any argument from me, Martin Looney, about the benefits of regionalism. I'm thinking about the politics. And obviously you know better than I do because you've been at it almost 30 years. Schools are tough. That's sort of the most local of all issues. We just saw the election in Virginia, and that kind of wave did not reappear in Guilford when they tried to bring up, sort of this right-wing revolt based on local teaching and making up this thing about critical race theory. But with the closing of the schools and a history of people feeling very protective of their children based on what's taught in their schools, does that make it especially hard to regionalize school districts? I mean, you see anywhere else where it's on the table, or Derby and Ansonia is still talking about it?
I think they are, but it is, as you say, it is very difficult. A few years ago, we had another case in point when we had a large number of, in effect, hurricane refugee children coming from Puerto Rico after that terrible storm that visited such devastation. We had large numbers of students coming to Waterbury in particular, among other municipalities. And Mayor O'Leary there came up with a plan because his schools were already overcrowded. He approached
Waterbury.
The suburban towns around Waterbury, who all had been losing school populations over the last 10 years, and said, if you make some of your classrooms available to us, we will send the kids. We'll also send the teachers with them, and we'll take care of the busing to get them there. We just need a place for them to be taught. Not one school in the area would take him up on that. And that was
Is that because they didn't want the kids in the school building from Puerto Rico?
I don't know what their reasons were, but that it kind of looks like that.
Free money, no thanks. Wow.
Free money, no thanks. No cost to us. Just open up the schools, or open up these classrooms in certain schools, and so that was really disheartening. But I think we need to keep pushing in that direction, because there are so many small town school districts that are losing school population, and it really is redundant for them to have significant education bureaucracies on top of their in-school administrators. And it just makes no sense to continue to have so many single town school districts with so few schools to administer.
So where are we on that? Are there places where it's under consideration?
Well, I would hope that it's a constant thing as people look at their numbers. The census numbers. If you look at what happened in the redistricting process that we just went through, virtually all of Eastern Connecticut, those towns have lost population to some degree. That's why the second district, represented by Congressman Joe Courtney, needs to gain 22,000 people to bring it up to the number that it needs to have. The third district needs to gain about 5,000. The first district, represented by Congressman Larson, needs to gain 5,000. Fifth district needed to lose 5,000 people, and the fourth district, represented by Congressman Himes, needed to lose 25,000 people.
That's so interesting. So maybe give us Bridgeport and give the rest of Middletown to Courtney?
But so we were able to come up with an agreement, obviously, to redraw the General Assembly lines, but we hit deadlock on the congressional line, right. So that's why that's in the hands of a special master. But there are a significant number of towns in Connecticut that have lost population, and in fact, one of the dramatic things is that if you looked at our overall population, we grew by less than 1% statewide over 10 years. But within that, there were dramatic changes that some communities like Stamford had a population gain of 10% or more. Stamford went from 122,000 people to 135. But on the other hand,
and we're just under them, right? New Haven's like at 134 or something.
we're now third. We're at 134, which was a gain for New Haven also, because we were at 130 in the last census. We went up to 134. Bridgeport went from 144 to 148, but Stamford went from 122 to 135. Hartford was the only big city to lose the population, dropped from 124 to 121. Waterbury went from 110 to 114. So the urban areas gained some, but there are many small towns and rural areas that lost as much as 10% of their population. So we saw significant population gains and losses within the overall figure that didn't change much.
Martin Looney, can I ask you one last question on special ed? You talked
Yes.
about how a town has to spend 4.5 times its per pupil grant from the state
Yes.
before aid for special ed costs kicks in. I don't fully
Right.
understand what that means. That means if you're getting a certain amount of state aid for each of your kids, what number has to go to 4.5 times to kick in
That number,
state aid?
so let's say the per pupil grant is, say, $17,000. That might be fairly typical in some areas. So that would mean that the town would have to spend 70-something thousand dollars before state aid kicked in.
And obviously, more and more people have what are they called, IEPs or something, individual
Right.
education programs. My daughter's teaches special ed, and she says there's just more and more kids needing that kind of help, being identified as needing that kind of help. It's become a big part of schools.
Yes, there are more and more kids being identified as needing, having attention deficit disorder or autism to some degree, and that's an increasingly expensive part of public education.
And we're talking to State Senator Martin Looney, the president pro tem of the State Senate, basically the most important person to talk about what's going to happen in Hartford this special session. We're talking to him on WNHH's Dateline New Haven about what do you do for an encore, or, okay, what have you done for me lately? What's he going to do in 2022 after quite a productive 2021 session? Martin Looney, we talked about mental health care, access. We talked about special ed reimbursement and school regionalization. Are there other top priorities? I know you can't accomplish as much in a few months on an election year as you can in a full session in an odd number year. Is there anything on your agenda beyond that?
Oh yes, yeah. We're hoping to make some tax adjustments. I know the governor yesterday in the press conference that we had, where he was talking about what I think was a wonderful choice to use some federal funds that had been unexpended to go back to 2020, which was of course the initial year of impact for COVID, and to raise the earned income tax credit for the working poor, so that people will get a supplementary benefit of those who were eligible in 2020.
So that'd be one time, right?
That's a one-time thing, but we've already raised the general level above what it was, because in the bipartisan budget of 2017, when we were in a crisis and had to deal with the Republicans that year, the EITC reimbursement was reduced to 23% of what the federal EITC is. We raised it to 30.5% for 2021. So the people filing their returns in 2022 for 2021 will get a 30.5% EITC. But with the governor's action, on top of that, those who were eligible in 20 will get a very significant increase, because they'll get a supplementary check that will raise their EITC payment for that year.
So that's a one-time. Does that need to be legislatively approved, or is that something that he can just do?
That's something that does not require legislative approval at one time, federal initiative on federal funding. But what will need legislative initiative, and the governor has said he's open to, is a further increase in the standard payment for EITC. And that's something that I would like to see us make permanent, to get to the level that will now be the one-shot deal based upon 2020.
Now the 30.5, that's permanent, right?
Yes.
So what is the level with the one-shot deal that you want to make permanent?
41.5.
Okay, so you'd like to see people in Connecticut to have the 40 to the level at which you can get the earned income tax credit, meaning that you don't have to pay taxes on money you earned up to a certain level, to be 30.5. And what is that to 41.5? What's that of? And we talk about federal levels. Does that mean the income level you have to be at the federal government, or the amount that you could take off?
Whatever credit you get at the state level is based upon what your federal credit is. So whatever credit is, we now are getting 30.5% of that. But
so it's the same people. If you already it's the same people qualified. Oh, yeah. So if you get $10,000 off your federal taxes, you now can get another $3,500 off your state taxes.
The thing is, Paul, most of these people don't have much tax liability at all, so they're getting a refundable credit.
Okay,
they're generally low income enough that their tax liability at the federal level is quite low, and their tax liability at the state level their income tax liability may be non-existent. One of the reasons the Republicans had opposed this for so long in Connecticut, although nationally there was bipartisan support for it going back to President Ford and President Reagan, both endorsed the EITC at the federal level because it was payments to assist low-income working people. So the emphasis on working people gained their support. But in Connecticut, Governor Rell and Governor Rowland constantly opposed it and said it was a windfall for people who didn't pay income tax, completely ignoring the fact that those low-income folks are paying all kinds of other taxes. They're paying sales taxes, they're paying property taxes, they're paying car taxes, they're paying occupational taxes, everything else, but their income was low enough that they didn't have income tax liability. But what it means, there are over 186,000 Connecticut residents who qualify for the loan. There are 12,000 in New Haven who receive the EITC. And
they receive or qualify? Because I know we always have to get them to sign up.
They receive right now in New Haven. It's 12,000, I believe. And based upon the one shot that's going into effect for 2020 eligibility, they'll get an additional 5 million more in benefits.
So I want to ask you something about the EITC. So the Earned Income Tax Credit is a way to get more aid to working poor people without raising taxes and having it just be welfare or a benefit, right? So tell me if you agree with this analysis. In 1990s, Bill Clinton was the Democratic president. Democratic constituency was asking for more help for people struggling to get by, working hard, playing by the rules, that kind of thing, while all the federal tax policy was benefiting the very wealthy. Clinton was kind of a master at how to achieve goals within the constraints of a political environment. He said, I'm not going to be able to get through Congress ways to just give direct aid to people. Instead, I have to call it a tax break because that sells among the people who are really trying to help the rich but saying they're trying to help the average taxpayer. So the EITC has really become a way for Democrats to help people in a way that can succeed more easily in political discourse. So before I get to my main question, do you agree with that analysis?
I do to some extent, but what it does, it's an economic development engine because the recipients of the EITC are generally, certainly are low-income working people, and they are people who are living on a very tight financial margin. So virtually every dollar that comes into that household gets spent again on clothing, food, car repairs, whatever. So it really is a shot in the arm for the local economy. So these people are not wealthy enough that they're squirreling money away. Every dollar that comes in goes out again. So it really is a stimulus to the economy.
It's really calling the other side on the rhetoric of, do you want to cut taxes to help people who are working hard and playing by the rules, or are you just using that as a cover to reward people who have a lot of under income that they want to shelter from taxes? But here's the question I wanted to ask you, Marty. So you and other members, Democrats in the legislature for years, have argued that it's unfair that the very wealthy pay so much of a lower percentage of their income in taxes than the rest of the state, right? And the last time was 2014 when the Department of Revenue Services studied it, which showed that it was something like 2 or 3 times higher percentage if you're a cashier or a teacher or a cop than if you're someone who owns a hedge fund. So last year you had a study created so that we can get a new number, so that we can make policy based on knowing what the difference is. Democrats have wanted to raise marginal rates on the wealthy, meaning if you make $500,000 or $1 million a year, you'll pay more than 6.99% that everybody else pays on income, but just on that new income. And you want to have capital gains tax the same rate. Governor Lamont has been dead set against it. He says it's a non-starter. Like other wealthy people in Greenwich, he calls that punishing success if you ask the very wealthy to pay the same kind of taxes that cops and teachers pay. But given those constraints, you were able to agree with Ned Lamont last session in raising the earned income tax credit. So that was the way you got more help to working families who are disproportionately burdened by the tax system. Is that going to be the play again this year? Or is there any realistic way in an election year when Lamont's running for re-election that you can get higher marginal tax rates on the table?
Well, we never know until we try, but I was encouraged that he seemed open to a permanent increase in the ITC beyond the one shot. The other issue is that we are looking at, and he's talked about this as well, because it's something that went back to his 2018 campaign, was addressing the issue of the property tax credit on the state income tax that, again, had to be scaled back in 2017. and eligibility for it was limited to seniors and those with children. But we want to be able to expand that again. That would be middle income tax relief, because people would get some benefit as an offset on their income tax for what they pay in local property taxes. And the other thing, Paul, is that
why wouldn't Greenwich love that? They pay the most in property taxes, but not proportionally.
They wouldn't. They would be too wealthy to get the benefit.
Oh, okay.
It wouldn't be for everybody. It would be capped at a certain income level.
Gotcha.
And so again, that's why we Democrats would support it, because it would be progressive. And
so Lamont is basically saying I can't run for re-election saying that I'm raising taxes on anything, correct?
I don't know what he's going to say regarding that, but we have to meet him on ground where he's certainly willing to meet with us, and it seems to be on the ITC and on property tax credit. He is. One of the things that we know is that the property tax really is a regressive tax, because as we know, in New Haven, there are people with modest homes paying $6,000 or $7,000 a year in property taxes, and they may be struggling to pay that. And there are people in more affluent areas with more luxurious homes paying more than $20,000 a year in property taxes. Now, some of those people may also be struggling, but there are some people for whom that $20,000 tax payment is significantly less of their annual income than the $6,000 or $7,000 payment is for others. And that's why the property tax continues to be, in many ways, regressive and burdensome.
So now what you're going to be hearing from Republicans this session, that they want you to cut the sales tax. They're going to say that inflation, how are we going to deal with inflation? That's a big issue for the Republicans and for a lot of Americans, right? Our pay is going up, but prices are going up as well because of supply chain problems related to COVID and also the overheat economy, according to some economists, that we want to buy so much stuff and there wasn't enough capacity to meet that demand. What's your position on Republican calls to reduce the state state sales tax? Does that cause a long-term problem when this period passes? Because their argument is that because people are buying more stuff, if you charge less in tax, we'll get the same amount of revenue. But that's not going to be true forever. So what's your position on that proposal?
Well, we're open to a discussion on some change in the sales tax, as long as it's coupled with things that are progressive. The problem, the sales tax, of course, is a regressive tax, as is the property tax. And the problem is that virtually every tax we levy, except the income tax, is in some way a regressive tax. Now, the studies have shown that lower income people do pay a much greater percentage of their income overall on the sales tax than the very wealthy do. And that's partly because there are so many items to which the sales tax applies that everyone buys regardless of income. It's also true that the wealthy overall, of course, just in pure dollars, do spend more on the sales tax because they buy more expensive items. But I think the sales tax will be an issue for discussion. But I think your point is the most salient one, is that in the late 90s, when we had a booming economy with the dot-com boom and all of that, and the state was running big surpluses at the time, the Republicans were attacking us for overtaxation. But yet at the same time, they weren't willing to put more money into the pension fund, and Governor Rowland at the time insisted on the $50 rebate payments that shortly after that
I remember that $50. That was crazy.
It was, but he was worried about running for re-election, I guess, against Barbara Kennelly at the time. And the concern, of course, is that the economic cycles change very quickly. So I think you're right, is that the surpluses that we have are often quite temporary. The federal money that we have is quite temporary. So we have to be very careful about putting a long-term dent in our revenue stream when we have a short-term.
Can you sunset it, or does it become impossible to unsunset it because it'll become unpopular? It'll be like raising taxes.
Well, their proposal is a sunset, I believe, but
they believe it could be permanent, because otherwise you'll be accused of raising taxes. All the ads will say so-and-so raised taxes because you let the sunset expire.
Well, that's right. But that's why I think that we need to let our fiscal committee, our finance committee chaired by Senator Fonfara on the Senate side, who, by the way, was the one who actually came up with the idea for the volatility set aside a few years ago. The Republicans try to take credit for that. But the idea of not appropriating all of the money that comes in from the capital gains side, the estimates and final part of the income tax, to put some of that in reserve, that has helped us build up our budget reserve fund. So I think we've learned lessons about the volatility of our income stream, but our committee, I think, needs to have a chance to weigh in and make its recommendations on on what responsible fiscal
A
policy.
question here we got: how do you help the average Joe deal with inflation?
Well, I think that the main concern is, again, as I said, if we can do something to provide some property tax relief, that helps everyone. An increase in the ITC is also an increase to people who are struggling and are very sensitive to any change in the cost of items that they have to buy.
All right. Martin Looney, State Senate President, hanging in with us here in Dateline, New Haven. What about some of the other issues this session? Is it fair to say those are your top 3 or 4? Is there anything else that you're going to be hanging your hat on, pushing hard for?
Well, there are some others, Paul. We have been engaging for a number of years in various reforms in terms of healthcare insurance, access to healthcare, going back to about 2014 when Senator Fasano and I first partnered up on that. And there'll be some things that we've achieved and that we want to expand upon. Going back to 2014, we increased state oversight on acquisitions and hospital mergers and acquisitions practices. And in 2000, you noticed last week there was a celebration about a federal bill on banning surprise billing.
Right.
We did that in 2015.
I remember that. Yeah, you and Fasano.
Quite a bit ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. And also, we were one of the first states to deal with the issue of charging facility fees to jack up the bill on a service that's provided at a location that used to be, say, a freestanding clinic and is now being provided under a hospital's umbrella. And even though it's provided by the same provider at the same location using the same equipment, hospitals try to add a hospital facility fee to it. And we oppose that by saying that if the service is normally one provided as an outpatient, it shouldn't have a facility fee attached to it, even if the ownership of the facility has changed. So then in 2017, we were one of the first states to deal with the price gouging by pharmacy benefit managers who had put a gag clause on pharmacists that they couldn't tell their customers that in some cases it was cheaper to pay cash for a generic product than it was to put it through your insurance with the copay that would have to pay. So we've done a lot of consumer-related legislation in those areas over the year. In 2018, we said that drug companies would be required to justify increases when a drug price jumps more than 20% in 1 year or 50% over 3 years. And 19, we expanded the surprise billing bill to cover laboratories as well as physician-provided services. We also shortened the time period that insurers have to respond to urgent care requests and denials of coverage when it could be sensitive to the patient's health. Under prior law, they had 72 hours to respond. We cut that down to 48. And last year, or 2 years ago also, we were one of the first states to take action on what are called trauma activation fees. Hospitals were using this as another profit center that whenever they had to activate a trauma center, they were charging a fee. And we found out that hospitals were charging at tremendously different amounts of that. So we've added transparency to that process. They have to disclose what they're charging. And now we can look at whether we need to regulate them further. We also prohibited insurers from using retroactive reviews to deny coverage for emergency room services. So we had heard cases of people who had significant distress, maybe chest pain or shoulder pain, and thinking they might have a heart attack, go to the hospital, find out it was a severe case of indigestion. And in some cases, the insurers were retroactively going to deny coverage because it turned out not to be a true emergency. But we by statute said that as long as the person was acting in good faith with symptoms that a layperson could possibly take seriously and believe that a heart attack might be a reasonable cause of what the person is feeling, the insurer cannot, after the fact, deny the coverage. We also in 21 we prohibited insurers from using the so-called copay accumulator programs that prevent patients from using copay assistance programs and discount cards to prevent them from getting the benefit of those discounts. And you head to 2022. We still have more consumer protection work in that area. I think that we'll be looking at to deal with again, looking at the trauma activation fees. We'll also be looking at the issue of facility fees being potentially added to telehealth visits, and whether or not that should be allowed or regulated in some way. So there's a great deal.
Well,
in
that
the
actually
area
raises a question about how COVID is it going to permanently change government. For instance, are you guys going to be meeting in person? Will your public hearings be in person? Will people be able to testify through Zoom like in the past? What did we learn from these last 2 years? Just like you mentioned, telehealth was now a big part of ongoing health care. So you're talking about whether facility fees will be added. How will the way you govern change or not change now in 2022 after the first 2 years of the pandemic?
Well, I think it's too soon to say in detail, but because conditions change under the pandemic rather rapidly. At this point, I think we need to just be ready for the start of the 2022 session to be similar to the way we started 2021, beginning with public hearings being remote. We don't know for sure. Maybe the pandemic will have peaked and crested and gone significantly downward. But we think the public hearing process worked very well virtually last time. I heard from a number of constituents who were able to testify in public hearings for the first time because they were able to do it online, were able to stay home, even if they had to wait a long time for their 5 minutes of testimony before a hearing, were able to do it.
They didn't have to give up 24 hours or 20 hours to be in Hartford.
They didn't have to drive to Hartford and back. They didn't have to sit waiting for 8 or 10 hours in a.
So in the future, are we going to see hearings all virtual, all in person, or some combo?
I think there'll be a combo because there is value to people being able to testify in person. But I think there is also, as I said, a number of people last year felt they were able to engage in the process for the first time because maybe they had a restrictive work schedule or maybe they had childcare or elder care responsibilities. They couldn't take an entire day and devote it to going to Hartford to testify at a public hearing. But when it was done virtually, they could. So I think we're likely to see some hybrid nature of this going forward.
WNHH's Dateline New Haven with State Senator Martin Looney. Just a couple minutes to go. Rob McCormick asks, Martin Looney, when are you going to run for governor? You've been the governor, by the way. I'll just mention that. As State Senate President, you are the governor when the governor...
When both the governor and the governor were out of state, right. They even offered me a police detail the last time, at the state police detail, and I said, no, it would only scare the neighbors. So I declined.
Did you pardon anyone or decide that people had to wear their coats backwards or anything?
No. Although there have been cases when I think there were cases where lieutenant governors issued some executive orders that were then contraindicated and repealed by the governors.
States when they're on the state. Yeah. So running for governor this year, you got a Bob Stefanowski, Themis Clarity's on the Republican side. It looks like Lamont is definitely going to be the Democratic candidate. How do you see that shaking out? Whom do you expect the Democrats to be running against in the end? And how do you see the issue landscape in that campaign?
Well, I think that at this point, Stefanowski has an edge to the extent that he ran before, but I think his weaknesses as a candidate also were visible last time. Themis Claridis has experience in state government, so I see both of them as strong competitors for the Republican nomination. But I think that Governor Lamont has a strong record to run for re-election on. I think he has done well in managing the state during the COVID period. He has not, I think, overreached with the use of his executive powers, and I think he'll be a strong candidate for re-election.
Nationally, are we headed for civil war? Are we headed to having elections not be free anymore? How serious are the stakes? Are people being alarmist, or are we at a critical moment for our democracy, and how should we deal with it?
I believe we are at a critical moment for our democracy, and I'm terrified by the kind of casual way that people who are denying the results of the last election without any evidence are seemingly ready to throw away the principle of democratic elections. And based upon the fiction of President Trump that somehow the election was stolen or skewered. And it is just disheartening how little commitment to our democratic fundamentals some people seem to have, including members of Congress.
How widespread enough is it? Are things going to change? How do you see it playing out in the next year and the next 3 years?
Well, I'm just very worried about what it might be. I know that some states are trying to build a case for not accepting the popular result in the state and to apportion electors based upon the view of the state legislature, even if that's not in accordance with how the vote in that state went. There's a group. There's a Republican think tank, the that submits proposed legislation to Republican legislators in many states. And
ALEC.
ALEC, right, American Legislative Exchange Council. And what they want to do, one of the things they were thinking about is repealing the 17th Amendment that provides for direct election of United States senators.
Wow.
Because you can gerrymander a whole state. They've succeeded in gerrymandering legislative districts, and maybe they can gerrymander congressional districts, but they can't control an election for governor or U.S. senator through a gerrymandered process because people have to run in a whole state. So their argument is, well, we should give it back to the control of the state legislatures to pick U.S. senators rather than having them popularly elected. Their fig leaf argument that they use is that would generate closer cooperation and relationships between the federal legislators and state legislatures. That's not always the case now, but their real reason is to say, we can't win sometimes in districts that we can't gerrymander.
Martin Looney, how long do you see yourself continue to do this? You've been 1980s. You've been in the legislature since, right?
81. I came in was elected in 80. Came in 81.
So you've been there. How much longer do you think you got in you?
Well, I plan to run for re-election this year.
All right. Well, I'm so honored that every year you also come to Dateline New Haven and tell us what you plan to do in the legislature. And then no matter what happens, you come back to report on how it went. We appreciate that very much, Martin Looney, and wish you success in the next legislative session and good health as well.
Thank you, Paul, and the same to you. Everybody, be careful. Wear a mask.
And thank
you.
Wear
the N95s.
And just so you know, Marty and I are alone in our own rooms. That's why I'm not wearing a mask. I know some people get upset about that. And we're going to also thanks to Harry Droz, the best station manager in the business, and even showed me how to work some of the controls here that I was messing up. I apologize for that technical glitch at the beginning of the program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.